In today's world, there is a quiet, lingering sense of suffocation. You work hard, yet nothing ever seems to change. There are no savings to fall back on. A single illness could mean the loss of your job. Your heart is always being chased by the fear of losing something. At times, it may feel like life itself is an endless war of attrition. This story follows a man named Shōbei who lives through days just like that. He supports a family, keeps his anxieties about the future tucked deep inside, and simply tries to make it through each day. Shōbei is a low-ranking officer under the city magistrate of Kyoto. His duty is to escort convicts down the Takase River, sending them into exile on remote islands. The prisoners always board the boat with downcast faces, surrounded by grief and regret, spending what little time they have left with their families. Perhaps Shōbei, watching those less fortunate than himself, had started to believe he was better off than they were. But then, one day, he meets a man unlike any convict he's seen before. The man's name is Kisuke. He has been exiled for killing his younger brother. And yet, he boards the boat with a bright and peaceful expression. Shōbei has a family, he has a job and a home, and still there's a quiet sorrow in his heart. Kisuke has nothing. He is a criminal, yet his face carries a gentle smile. "Why are you smiling?" Shōbei asks him. And through that question, he begins to reflect on the life he himself has lived. What is it that Kisuke reveals? For those who are weary from the burdens of daily life, this quiet story may be just what your heart needs to hear. The Takase Boat by Mori Ogai. The Takase Boat was a small vessel that traveled up and down the Takase River in Kyoto. During the Tokugawa period, when a person in Kyoto was sentenced to exile on a remote island, their family was summoned to the prison compound. There, they were granted one final farewell. After that, the convict would be placed aboard the Takase Boat and sent downriver to Osaka. The task of escorting the prisoner was assigned to a doshin, a low-ranking officer under the Kyoto town magistrate. Although it was never officially permitted, it was quietly tolerated that one relative of the convict would accompany them on the journey to Osaka. This silent agreement, though unofficial, was understood by all. At the time, those sentenced to exile were, of course, considered to have committed serious crimes. But not all of them were hardened criminals who had killed during theft or set fires with cruel intent. Many of those who found themselves aboard the Takase Boat were people who, through a kind of tragic misunderstanding, had committed unexpected crimes. A common example would be a man who had attempted a double suicide with a lover, yet survived while the woman perished. The Takase Boat, carrying such individuals, would set out as the evening bells began to toll. It would glide eastward between the darkened wooden houses of Kyoto, their silhouettes sinking into shadow. Crossing the Kamo River, the boat would drift quietly downstream, Inside, the convict and their family member would talk through the night, sharing stories of their past. These conversations always circled the same theme: regrets for a past that could never be undone. The Doshin, tasked with escorting them, would sit nearby, listening. In doing so, he came to understand the heartbreaking circumstances of the convict's family. Details that could never be known through courtroom testimony or written reports. They revealed the truth that no official hearing, no matter how thorough, could ever fully capture. Among the Doshin, the officers tasked with such duties, there were all kinds of temperaments. Some found the task of boat escorting tiresome. They shut their ears to the stories and remained cold, indifferent. Others, however, quietly opened their hearts to the sorrow of those they accompanied. Though they could not show it outwardly in the name of duty, they listened in silence, feeling pain bloom within their chests. Now and then, a particularly kind-hearted Doshin, someone soft, easily moved to tears, would be assigned to a convict and family caught in especially tragic circumstances. In such moments, even the most disciplined officer might find himself unable to hold back tears. Because of this, escort duty on the Takase Boat was considered an unpleasant assignment. Among the Doshin, it was one many hoped to avoid. No one remembers exactly when it happened, but it was likely during the Kansei era, when Lord Shirakawa Rakuko governed affairs in Edo. On a spring evening, as the cherry blossoms at Chion-in Temple scattered at the sound of the evening bell, an unusual convict boarded the Takase Boat. His name was Kisuke. He appeared to be around 30 years old, and he had no fixed home. Naturally, he had no family close enough to be summoned for a final farewell. So he boarded the boat alone. The Doshin assigned to accompany him was Haneda Shōbei. All he'd been told was that Kisuke had been convicted of fratricide, of killing his younger brother. As they walked from the prison yard to the river pier, Shōbei observed the prisoner. Kisuke was thin, his face was pale and drawn, but he was calm, remarkably composed. He treated Shōbei with genuine respect, not the kind of false humility some prisoners adopt to curry favor. He showed no resistance, no bitterness. There was a quiet dignity in his demeanor. And unlike others who tried to flatter authority through forced politeness, Kisuke's attitude felt real. Haneda Shōbei was puzzled. Even after boarding the boat, he didn't just keep a formal watch over Kisuke out of duty. He kept observing him, carefully, constantly, his attention never straying far. That evening, the wind had died down. A thin veil of clouds softened the outline of the moon. It was a night touched by the approaching breath of summer. From the soil on the river banks and even beneath the water, A damp mist seemed to rise, as if the earth itself were exhaling. By the time the boat left the lower districts of Kyoto and crossed the Kamo River, the world around them had fallen silent. Only the sound of water breaking against the bow could be heard. On night journeys like this, it was permitted for the prisoner to lie down. But Kisuke didn't. He sat upright, looking up at the moon, whose brightness shifted with the movement of the clouds. He said nothing. His brow was calm. There was even a faint light in his eyes. Shōbei didn't watch him directly. He kept his gaze modest from the side, yet he never looked away. And over in his mind, he repeated the same thought. How strange. How very strange. For the expression on Kisuke's face, it was gentle, almost cheerful. If he hadn't been showing restraint in front of an officer, Shōbei could almost imagine him whistling or softly humming to himself. Shōbei thought to himself, I've done this many times before, escorted many prisoners on the Takase Boat, and without exception, they've all looked pitiful. So much so, it was often painful to even look at them. But this man, what is he? He looks like someone on a pleasure cruise. His crime is the murder of his own younger brother, even if that brother had been a wicked man. And regardless of how it happened, surely, as a human being, his heart couldn't be this at ease. Could this pale, thin man be one of those rare monsters? A man without human feeling? No, that didn't seem right. Could he be mad? But there wasn't the slightest trace of madness in his behavior. Then what on earth could explain him? The more Shōbei thought, the more Kisuke's demeanor eluded his understanding. After a while, Shōbei could no longer contain himself. He finally spoke. Kisuke, what's going through your mind right now? Yes, sir, Kisuke replied, looking around nervously. He straightened his posture, as if worried he had done something wrong, and cautiously glanced at Shōbei's expression. Shōbei felt he needed to explain why he had spoken so suddenly. It was, after all, a personal question, one outside the bounds of duty. So he said, No, it's not that I'm accusing you of anything. It's just, I've been wanting to ask how you feel about being sent to the island. I've taken many people down this river before. Each one had their own reasons, their own sorrow. But all of them, without exception, were deeply grieved. They would board the boat with their families and cry through the night. But you're different. It doesn't look like you find this exile painful. So tell me, what is it you truly feel? Kisuke smiled gently. Thank you, he said. I appreciate your kindness in asking. Indeed, for most people, being sent to an island would be a terrible fate. I understand that feeling. But I think that pain comes only to those who have lived comfortably. Kyoto is a fine city, but when I compare it to the suffering I've endured here, I can't imagine any place being harder to live in. Thanks to the government's mercy, my life has been spared, and I'm being sent to an island. No matter how harsh it may be, I doubt it's a land of demons. Until now, there has never been a place where I truly belonged. But this time, the authorities are saying you may live here. Just having a place to stay, a place where I'm allowed to be, that alone is more than I could ever ask for. And though I look so weak, I've never once fallen ill. Even if the labor on the island is harsh, I believe I'll endure it without falling sick. Also, for this exile, I was given 200 mon in copper coins. I have them here. As he spoke, Kisuke placed a hand on his chest. At the time, it was customary for those sentenced to remote exile to receive 200 man in travel funds. Kisuke continued speaking. It's a little embarrassing to admit, but until now, I've never once walked around with as much as 200 man in my pocket. Whenever I found work, I threw myself into it with everything I had. But the money I earned, it passed quickly from my hands to someone else's. When I could buy food with cash, that was still the better case. Most of the time, it went straight to paying off debts, only for me to borrow again just to keep going. But once I was put in prison, I didn't work, and yet I was fed. Even that alone filled me with shame. To think I was being cared for by the authorities while doing nothing in return. And yet, when I was released, they gave me these 200 man. As long as I'm fed by the government, I don't have to use it. So I've kept it. For the first time in my life, I have money I can truly call my own. Until I reach the island, I don't know what kind of work I'll find. But I'm looking forward to using this money to begin my new life there. With that, Kisuke finished his story. Shōbei replied, I see. I understand. But he was too surprised by what he'd heard to say anything more. He sat silently, lost in thought. Shōbei was approaching middle age. He had a wife and 4 children. His elderly mother was still alive. Altogether, they were a household of 7. He lived with the utmost frugality. So much so that he was often called stingy. He owned only 2 sets of clothing: his official uniform and his nightwear. But misfortune had struck in one regard. His wife came from a wealthy merchant family. She had grown up in comfort, And though she meant well and tried to live within the rice stipend Shōbei received, she could never fully embrace the life of restraint. By the end of each month, money always ran short. And quietly, without his knowing, she would ask her family for help to fill the gap. This was because Shōbei hated borrowing money. Even receiving gifts from his in-laws during family celebrations made him uncomfortable. It pained him to think they were covering the holes in his household finances. And it was that quiet tension, that unspoken discomfort, which sometimes stirred waves in the otherwise peaceful Haneda family. Shōbei sat there, reflecting on all he had just heard. He began to compare Kisuke's life with his own. Kisuke had worked and worked, yet no money ever stayed in his hands. Whatever he earned passed quickly to someone else. It was, without a doubt, a pitiful and unfortunate life. But then, Shōbei thought about his own household, and he wondered, was it really so different? He too simply lived on the stipend of rice provided by the government. He used it all, just as soon as it came in. The only real difference, perhaps, was the scale. The numbers were larger in his case. But even so, he didn't have the equivalent of Kisuke's treasured 200 mon. When he considered the difference in scale, he could understand why Kisuke regarded those 200 mon as a fortune. And yet, there was something that Shōbei simply couldn't grasp. Something that refused to sit comfortably in his mind. It was Kisuke's complete lack of greed. His deep contentment with so little. Kisuke had struggled just to find work. And yet, as long as he could labor, he felt satisfied. When he was imprisoned, he was astonished to receive food without effort. He said it was the first time in his life he had ever felt content. But Shōbei, no matter how well his life was running, had rarely, if ever, felt content. He didn't usually feel happy or unhappy. But deep in his heart, there was always a quiet fear. What if I lose my post? What if I fall gravely ill? And when he discovered that his wife had been secretly taking money from her family, those fears rose to the surface. Where did this difference of heart come from? Shōbei felt it couldn't be explained away by differences in family background. Even if he were living alone, free of his obligations, he doubted he could ever possess a mind like Kisuke's. Something fundamental separated them. It was something deeper, more essential. And so Shōbei began to wonder, what is a human life really? When we are sick, we wish to be cured. When we lack food, we want to eat. When we have no savings, we want some. And even when we do have savings, we want more. Human desire has no end. Yet here, before his very eyes, was Kisuke, standing still, calm, content. It was as though Kisuke alone had found a way to stop. Shōbei looked at him again, with new eyes, full of quiet awe. And in that moment, under the moonlight, he almost thought he could see a faint glow, shining gently around Kisuke's head. Kisuke-san. Shōbei called out once more, still watching Kisuke's face. He said, Kisuke-san. It wasn't something he had meant to say. The word san, that mark of respect, had simply slipped from his lips. And the moment he heard it himself, Shōbei realized his mistake. That level of politeness was not appropriate for a convict. But the word had already been spoken. It could not be taken back. Yes, Kisuke replied. He too seemed puzzled by the respectful address. With a cautious glance, he studied Shōbei's expression. Feeling a little embarrassed, Shōbei continued speaking. I've asked you a lot already. But the truth is, you're being sent to the island for taking a life. If you don't mind, I'd like to hear why. Kisuke lowered his head slightly, his voice soft with humility. As you wish, sir. Though it's hard to speak of. What I did was a terrible thing, born of a dreadful misunderstanding. Even now, I don't know how it happened. Looking back, I can hardly believe it myself. It feels like it all happened in a dream. He took a quiet breath and began. My parents died of illness when I was very young. Only my younger brother and I were left behind. At first, the townspeople were kind to us. They gave what they could. I did errands around the neighborhood. And somehow we managed. We didn't starve or freeze. As we grew older, I tried to find work that would let us stay together. We helped each other, always side by side. It was last autumn. We were both working at a weaving workshop in Nishijin. Our job was called karabiki. It was a kind of assistant task. But then, my brother fell ill. He couldn't work anymore. We were living at the time in a rundown hut in the Kitayama area. Every day we crossed the bridge over the Kamiyagawa River to reach the workshop. Each evening when I returned home, he would always be waiting for me. And each time he'd say, I'm sorry to make you do all the earning, brother. One day, as usual, I came home. my mind blank with exhaustion, and I found him lying face down on his futon. The room was stained with blood. I dropped a bundle of bamboo leaves I was carrying and rushed to his side at once. I cried out, "What happened?" "Hey." My brother raised his face, his cheeks and chin stained with blood. But he couldn't speak. With each breath he took, a faint wheezing sound escaped from his wounded throat. I couldn't understand what had happened. "Did you cough up blood?" I asked, moving closer. He braced himself with his right hand against the floor and slowly lifted his body. His left hand clutched tightly at his throat. From between his fingers, a thick, dark mass of blood oozed out. He looked at me, as if to hold me back with just his eyes, then finally spoke in with great effort. "I'm sorry. Forgive me. This illness, it won't ever get better. I wanted to die quickly, to make things just a little easier for you. I thought if I cut my throat, I'd die right away. But I can't. The air just hisses out. I tried to push the blade in deeper, but it slipped and veered off to the side. If you could just pull it out for me, I'm sure I'd be able to die. Talking is painful. Please, help me pull it out." Then he loosened his grip. And once again, the sound of air wheezed from his throat. I stood frozen, unable to speak. I could only stare at the wound. The handle of a razor, about 2 sun in length, was jutting from his throat. It had pierced him deeply. He looked straight into my eyes, and in that gaze, I could read his plea. "Please, quickly, I'm begging you." I was overwhelmed by that look. My thoughts whirled in circles. I didn't know what to do. "I'll go get a doctor," I said. He looked at me, eyes filled with sorrow, and again pressed his throat. "A doctor? What good is that? It hurts." "Please, pull it out, I beg you." In times like these, it's strange how much the eyes can say. And slowly, his eyes changed. They sharpened, filled with something like resentment. Finally, I decided I had to do what he asked. "All right, I'll pull it out," I said. And in that instant, his eyes softened. Relief spread across his face. I knelt down, leaned forward. He propped himself on his elbows, lying on the floor. I gripped the handle of the razor tightly and pulled. Just then, the front door opened. A neighbor woman stepped in. She was the one I'd asked to look in on my brother while I was away. It was already quite dark inside the room, so I don't know how much she saw. But she let out a gasp. "Ah," and then immediately turned and ran out the door. I was still holding the razor. I just watched blankly as she disappeared. Then I turned to my brother. He had already stopped breathing. A stream of blood flowed from the open wound. Later, the elders of the neighborhood arrived, until the officials came and took me away. I sat there, the razor placed beside me, just staring at my brother's lifeless face, his eyes half open. Kisuke had been speaking while glancing upward, his head slightly bowed, eyes lifted toward Shōbei's face. But now that his story had come to an end, his gaze dropped to rest quietly on his knees. His account had been clear. Too clear, perhaps. It was carefully structured. The kind of story one tells after recalling the same events over and over again for half a year. He had likely been made to repeat it many times under questioning at the magistrate's office, each time recounting it with precision and care. To Shōbei, the scenes had come vividly to life, as if unfolding before his very eyes. And yet, a quiet doubt had begun to take shape in his mind. Was this really murder? Yes, the brother had said. If you pull the blade out, I'll be able to die. And Kisuke had done just that. And the boy had died. By the letter of the law, it might be considered killing. But wouldn't the brother have died regardless? His wish to die had come from unbearable suffering. And Kisuke, seeing that agony up close, had acted out of a desire to end that pain. If that's what truly happened, could such an act truly be called a crime? Shōbei turned it over in his mind, again and again, and in the end, he realized he couldn't make that judgment himself. He would have to leave it to the Bugyo-sama, the magistrate's ruling. Even so, something within him refused to settle. Deep in his chest, a vague unrest remained. A quiet voice inside him even whispered, I wish I could ask the Bugyo-sama directly. And so, as the night wore on, the Takase boat glided silently, carrying two speechless souls across the black moonlit surface of the river. Afterward, perhaps we are all adrift on the same boat. Status, income, titles. Even if we built tall towers upon these unsteady decks, one strong wave could bring it all crashing down. The freedom Kisuke spoke of, born from having nothing, may be something we once had, but quietly lost along the way. On the boat, everyone sways just the same. How do we face the fear of an uncertain future? What do we seek in life? And how much is enough? This story gently offers us that quiet paradox to ponder. If you found this tale enjoyable, subscribing to the channel and leaving a like would greatly encourage this old storyteller. You have done well today. Rest easy and sleep well. Good night.